Before we start this video, a large thank you to Isaac, Goodnats, Bueno, Aaron, Casey, Jeffrey, Everardo, Riptel, and Felipe for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Alright guys, so hello, we're going to start today by making some poisonous surfaces and poison effects on our character. So I start the game here now and walk over. You will see I have a tile placed, which is just some purple material over it, makes it look like water, and there's no collider so you can fall through it. I'm going to use this as my poison surface, and right now it does nothing, but by the end of the video it will effectively poison the player if we stand on it for long enough. So let's go to the player effects manager and double click that. We're going to open that up right away, and you will see that this derives from the character effects manager, so let's open up that as well. Now let's start by making a header right below the weapon effects here, and I'm just going to call the header poison. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with how poison works in Dark Souls, so you get the initial build-up phase, which means if you get enough build-up, you will become poisoned. And then when you are poisoned, you will take damage until the poison damage itself, or the timer, has completely subsided. So we're going to start off making a bool called isPoisoned, and this will tell you whether or not the player is poisoned. I'm going to make that public just so we can see it in the inspector too. You can use serialized field if you want. I like using public. I'm going to say public float poison buildup is equal to 0. So defaultly you don't have any on you. But the longer you stay in a poison area, the more poison buildup you will have. And then I'm going to make a public float poison amount. And I'm going to make that at 100. This is the percentage of poison amount you have left. And then I'm going to make a float. I'm actually going to make a public float rather. And I'm going to call this default poison amount. Okay, so I'm just going to put some comments here so it's more clear and explain what to do. So poison buildup, this is the buildup before you get poisoned over time. So if you're standing on a poison surface and this gets to 100%, we'll say, so 100, you will effectively become poisoned. So we'll say the buildup over time that poisons the player after reaching 100. This is the poison percentage amount that's left. So the amount of poison the player has to process before he becomes unpoisoned. And again, this will be a percentage, so 100 will be all of it, 0 will be none. It won't be the actual damage itself, just the percentage of the damage left to process. And then we have the default poison amount. This is just the number that will reset the poison amount when it's done. So the default amount of poison a player has to process once they become poisoned, you can set it at 100 or 500. I'm going to use 100 because I think of it in terms of like 100% of poison. Now we're going to make a couple functions down here, and this will all make... This will be very, very clear after I establish a couple of functions here and we start using these variables, but I'm sure a lot of you already know where this is going. So, protected virtual void, handle poison buildup. So we got to make a function to actually assign buildup to the player if he's on a poison surface. So we're going to say if we are poisoned already, return. We don't want to assign buildup if we're already poisoned. There's no point. And then we're going to say if poison or poison buildup, is greater than 0 and the poison buildup is less than 100, we're going to do some logic here. We're going to start by saying poison buildup is equal to poison buildup minus 1 times time dot delta time. So for every second that goes by in game, you're going to lose a poison buildup naturally. So if you're out of a poison area for long enough, you will lose all the buildup just naturally over time without needing to take an anti-poison or a purple moss clump. Else if the poison buildup is greater than 100 or equal to 100, well, then your player is now poisoned because we've reached 100% of poison buildup. If you want to use a bigger number, that's okay. I just like using 100 because I think of it in terms of percentage. So we'll say isPoisoned is true, and then poison buildup equals 0. We'll reset that because we're no longer building up poison. Reset that. We're now on to the actual poison stage. So for the poison stage, we're going to say protected virtual void. And I'm doing this in the character effects manager because it will be useful for both the enemy and the player because those classes derive from this base class. So both the enemy and the player can be poisoned. Now, we'll say handle is poisoned effect. So once you are poisoned, we will go to this function here. We're going to say if is poisoned, then we're going to run some logic. So the first thing we have to do is say if poison amount is greater than 0, that means like you still have some poison amount left percentage wise. Want to damage the player over time. And also, we want to say poison amount equals poison amount minus 1 times time dot delta time. So for every second in game, the poison amount will decrease by 1. When it gets to 0, it stops damaging the player. All right. So we're going to say else after this. And then we're going to say is poisoned is equal to false. And poison amount is equal to default poison amount, which will be reset typically at 100 for 100%. So moving along here swiftly, we can go over to the character or the player effects manager, and you'll see we call an awake the player stats manager. We're actually going to change this to a protected virtual or override void awake, and we're going to call a virtual awake on this base class. The reason why we're doing this is because we're actually going to use a base character stats variable on this class, and obviously the player effects manager and the enemy effects manager may have some different variables being called. So I'm going to basically just say base.awake on this awake method over here. I'm just going to keep that there because we're using the player stat manager in that heal player from effect function. So I'm going to say base.awake. So we're calling this awake function, and we're calling the functionality on the base awake method, which is over here. And on the base class, I'm going to call a variable of type character stats manager, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to put my namespace up here too for SG. I forgot to do that. And then I'm going to say character stats manager equals get component character stats manager. Now, if you have a player stats manager or an enemy stats manager, it will still get this variable because, like I said, both the player stats and enemy stats derive from the character stats. So this will still work. And the reason why we're calling it on this base class here is because we're actually going to use that variable. And as you can see here, this derives from the character stats. We're actually going to use the character stats to do some damage to the player on this handle is poison effect. So we're going to actually make a function for that too. Let's come here first where it says handle poison buildup. We're going to say if character stats manager is dead, return. We don't want to be adding more buildup if we're dead. And actually, we can delete that from there because we're going to make another function called public virtual void handle all buildup effects. And then we'll open it up and start it off with just if we are dead, return. And then right below that, we will place in our handle poison buildup and handle is poison effect. Okay, very simple and very straightforward. Now, let's actually do some damage to our player. Now, we have a function called take damage no animation, but that is specifically used for things like, I think it's used in one of our weird scenarios where we damage the player, not the parry or riposte, but I know we use it in some places. Oh, also when we don't take an animation through poise damage. So let's make another function here. I'm just going to copy and paste this one. I'm going to call it take poison damage because I'm doing this because I want to have the option to have different death animations for taking poison damage. And if you just want to add some other effects onto the poison damage function, it's just nicer this way. So let's go to the player stats and enemy stats manager, and we're going to override that take poison damage function we just made on the base class. And on the player stats manager, we're going to obviously call the base functionality, but we're also going to update our character's health bar, just like in this other function. If you look at other functions here too, like we update our health bar because our character has UI. And then we're also just going to copy and paste this functionality here. And we're going to paste that. So if we do get below 0 health, it will play a death animation. And if you have a special animation you want to play for poison death, you can put that in there now. I don't at this time. This is basically the same as the take damage no animation function. However, it does play a death animation. So it is a little bit different. And for that, it calls for its own function. Now let's copy this whole thing here now and go to the enemy stats manager and paste that there. And we're only going to do one thing different here. We're going to erase the health bar .set current health, and we're going to change enemy animator or player animator manager to enemy animator manager. And we're also going to copy this logic here. If we're not a boss, update our health bar. That's over our heads. And if we are a boss, let's update the main boss health bar on the bottom of the screen. Okay, that looks fine. So now your enemy should be handling poison just fine. Let's save that. All right, now where are we? Right, back here. Inside the handle is poison effect. We're just going to say character stats manager dot take poison damage. I'm just going to say 1. And actually, I'm not going to say 1 because that's a magic number. Let's actually make a variable for our poison damage. Public float, or int, sorry, rather, poison damage. and I'm going to defaultly set this at 1. You can play with that later and change it if you want. So that is fine for now. Let's just say poison damage. We're good to go. All right, let's save this. Now, what is next on the list? Okay, so there's all of our effects. We got to call those on the player and enemy manager, because if we're not calling our effects every frame or every few frames, they're not going off. So I'm going to use fixed update because there's no need to call this every single frame. It just is not necessary. So let's use it on fixed update. If you want to call it every frame, by all means you can, but it's perfectly fine to sit on fixed update. So on the enemy manager here, we don't have a fixed update function, so let's just say that. Let's just type in fixed update. And then we're going to call upon our enemy effects manager. So let's declare a variable of type enemy effects manager up here. And then we'll call that on awake. We will say enemy effects manager equals get component enemy effects manager. And then on the fixed update method we just created, we're just going to simply say enemy effects manager dot handle, I think we called it all buildup effects. So let's just see this. Or maybe we didn't. Let me go back and check. I thought we called it handle all buildup effects. Yes, handle all buildup effects. We did. Did I call the right variable? I did. Okay, what's going on? Oh, wait, I think I know. I think when we put our namespace in on our other class, it's not on our base. Yep, okay, see. No namespace, so it's not able to grab the base class. So, namespace, SG, don't forget your namespaces. And there we go. Now that should be fine. Now we should be able to say handle all build effects. Yes, we can. Wonderful. All right. Now let's do the same thing on the player manager. I will go up here and declare a variable of type player effects manager. Going to call that player effects manager. And then on the fixed update function, I'm just going to simply say player effects manager dot handle all buildup effects. I'm first going to call this on awake though, or else that won't do much. There we go, equals player effects manager. Now I think this should all be working fine, and I think we can move on to actually establishing the functionality for a poison surface after this. So we'll see. There we go. Let's save that. Looks wonderful. All right, so let's go over here. I'm just going to click on my pool. I've been having an issue with colliders, and I'll talk about that in a moment here. I'm just going to call this poison surface. So as you know, obviously, when we put a collider on an object and click is trigger, I'm just going to put a sphere collider here, and I'm going to hit is trigger. For some reason in this project and another project I had, sometimes I can walk over the collider even though it's a trigger. So if any of you guys know what's going on there, if I'm overlooking something, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear, but I'm going to see if it happens again when we walk over this in a moment. But first, let's make the script. So I'm going to say poison surface, whatever you want to call it, or poisonous surface, doesn't matter. And we're going to set this up so if any poor soul walks in this, they're going to become poisoned. Let's start by making your namespace. Mine is SG. There we go. Okay, now, next we are going to make a public float for poison buildup amount. So this is the amount of poison buildup you get for every second that you spend on this surface. And I'm going to say 7. 7's a pretty good number. Then I'm going to say public list. We're going to have a list of character effects managers. Okay, we're going to call that characters inside poison surface. And you're wondering, okay, Sebastian, why are we using a list? And it's because if we declare 1, because we're using on trigger enter here, and on trigger exit, and on trigger stay, if we declare 1, then if 2 people went on at the same time, only one of them will be getting poisoned because the character effects manager would change to the last person who entered. So on trigger enter, we're going to say character effects manager variable. We're going to call it character equals other.getComponent character effects manager. And then we're going to say, we're going to copy this actually first and paste this right here. And then we're going to say if character does not equal null on trigger enter, we're going to add that character to the list of characters inside the poison surface. So now they're on the list. And we're going to copy this and paste this on trigger exit, but then we're going to change add to remove. So when you enter the poisonous surface, you're added to the list of people that are currently in the poisonous surface. And when you leave, you're removed from it. And then on-trigger stay is called every frame. We're going to say for each here, and we're going to make this for each character effects manager variable, for each character in characters inside poison surface, we're actually going to allocate poison buildup on them all. So just say character dot poison buildup equals character dot poison buildup plus poison buildup amount times time dot delta time. Okay, that looks good. So now every time you enter, you're added to the list of people that's inside the pool, and when you leave, you're taken off that list. Because if we use one variable, if someone was inside the pool and another person came in, they would just replace the one variable with the newest person that came in, and the other person would stop getting poison buildup. So now we keep a list of everybody being inside the pool. So when we have multiplayer or enemies inside the pool, it works. Okay, so let's add another variable here called public float. We're going to call this poison timer. And I'm just going to initialize this at, say, 2. And this will be the amount of time between each poison damage tick. So, like, every 2 seconds, you will take poison damage. 1, 2, poison. Okay, and then right below that, or right below all this, rather, I'm just going to make a float timer. And this is just going to keep track of the current time. And then right under here, where it says, if we are poisoned, I'm just going to say timer plus equals time dot delta time. And actually, we can move that down inside the if poison amount is greater than 0. I just thought about that because, yeah, let's do that. So I'm just going to backspace here and copy this logic, and we'll drop it right in there if the poison amount is greater than 0, because otherwise it is irrelevant. Okay, and then we're going to say if timer is greater than or equal to poison timer, we want to then assign some damage. And then, of course, reset our timer to 0. So we'll copy this and put this in there. And then we'll say timer is equal to 0. Now this should be working fine right now. This should be perfect. So let's save that, and let's go over to our poison surface here. And as you can see, I have is trigger checked on this again. Let's see if I walk on top of this now when I walk through it. Okay, I'm going to look at my player effects manager to see. Yeah, you can see I collided there for a second. Not sure why that happens. But anyway, our poison buildup is going up. It just reached 100, and now we are taking poison damage. So you can see my health go down every 2 seconds. It takes for 1 damage. So if I change the damage here now to, say, let's change it to 22. You'll see every 2 seconds I lose 22 health. And we are effectively poisoned. And you can see the poison amount is going down every second. It goes down 1. Okay, and then our character has died. Wonderful. Wonderful. That works perfectly. All right, so as you can see here, though, we have one small bug, so let's fix that. The poison buildup still continues to rise after we've died. So we're just going to say if character dot is poisoned, we're just going to simply return. And this is on the poison surface script. We don't want to continue to add buildup if we're already poisoned. Okay, now let's go back in and make sure that all works fine. So I'll walk into here, and as you can see there, I'm clouding again with that collider for a second. Not sure why that happens. And the poison buildup goes up. We are skyrocketing. We're at 100. Okay, we're currently poisoned, and now we're taking damage every 2 seconds. I'll increase that to 11. And as you can see, the poison amount is actually slowly going down from 100% to 0. So if that got to 0, we'd stop taking poison damage. And I'm just going to run around here until the poison kills the player to make sure we don't take buildup after we have died. There we go. Okay, yeah, and we're no longer taking buildup. Cool, we're locked at 0. So there you go, guys. We have a fully functioning poison system. So our character is now able to become poisoned on surfaces, will take damage over time, and will acquire poison buildup the longer he spends on these surfaces. Now, in the next episode, we're actually going to add a way to cure the poison. We're going to add a poisonous particle effect that will play on your player while he is poisoned, so people can tell that you are poisoned. And we're going to see if we can figure out a solution to why we're colliding with that collider, even though it is set to a trigger. Like I said, if one of you guys know why that's happening, because it just appears to be a very brief collision and then it goes away, even though the collider is set to a trigger, let me know in the comments. So I'd be very interested in hearing it. I'll take a look tonight. I'm sure I will come across the solution. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please drop a like. It genuinely does help my series get around, and that's good for you guys because I can make more awesome videos. And if you're feeling like a super champion, check out my Patreon below. And a special thank you to my patrons. You guys are the anti-poison to the poison of my heart.